Hey everybody, Melissa Mackenzie, the American Spectator here at the Spectacle with our dear friend and my podcast partner, Scott McKay of Louisiana. That's okay, you can still listen to him. And yeah, I know. Every once in a while I have to get a Texas dig in there.
But you're making me sad. I don't want to be sad. We're doing a podcast.
So, well, instead of bagging on Louisiana, let's talk about Tennessee here for a minute. And really, more than that, let's remember first the innocent people who have been killed there recently by crazy Gen Zers, who seemingly, both of whom had, by all accounts, got good families, decent families, well cared for, well fed, well educated. And at the first sign of major emotional distress, both chose to take their personal angst out on the world and kill innocent people. One, a transgender girl who it's a strange situation because she was still living at home. I don't know what her deal was. She was mentally ill and on medication and all of that. And then this boy who looks like Joe All-American finds out that he's going to get laid off. And before that can happen, I guess it hadn't happened quite yet, he goes in and goes into the office meeting and kills everyone. And I don't even know what to say about a situation. These are not hardened criminals. This isn't like a predictable thing like the drug-addled dude who stabbed the businessman out on the streets of San Francisco, where that's just the normal thing that happens now. These were people who really had nothing wrong in their life, but maybe that's the problem. I thought about this through COVID, and I thought about this through my son, who's now had 2 bone marrow transplants, and people who know me or have, subscribed to the Spectator emails know that, because they, I talked about that in there. It's not something I've talked a lot about publicly, but one of the things that's been good about that for my family, and then one of my sons has autism, and so it's had all sorts of challenges that way. And then my daughter was the donor for my son. Well, one of the things going through trials like this and having difficulty is they have a sense of scale.
Yeah.
And I hate to say this, but in this modern cushy world, I am very happy for my children that they have had hardship that they've had to overcome, as terrifying as it's been for our whole family, as rare as it is. I mean, it's what my one son has. It's been like it's so rare in the rare diseases that there's like 6 cases a year like him, of the specific thing he has, and he's had it twice. So the chances of this are like insanely small. But the benefit to it is when like COVID hit, he's like, why are people so upset, Mom? This is really not a big deal. And he had a sense of perspective, and my children do, which is going to help them, because life is hard and you have to have some kind of mental toughness. And I look at these young people who like were ganging up on Riley Gaines for giving a speech, and them not liking what she's hearing, and the mob nearly tears her limb from limb.
Right. And tries to hold her for ransom.
And hold her for ransom. This is like, and then we go to San Francisco. Well, was it San Francisco yet again, where a conservative judge speaks, and then the law students are like, screaming him down and that sort of thing. And then now, judges are saying we're not taking any law students from Yale or
Stanford in this case, yeah.
Stanford. There's something wrong profoundly and deeply. There's no
Yeah.
sense of scale for what true hardship is. And then when somebody, and it's no fun being fired. I mean, nobody likes that, right? But you don't go in, but it happens every single day.
Sure. And at the end of the day, it's a job. Who cares?
Right. And it's and at a bank. I mean,
at a bank, it's a boring job. Like,
right.
I mean,
so I, and then he goes in and feels entitled
yeah,
to shoot these people because he has emotional discomfort. I don't know what to say about it. I just am floored.
well, so, you go back to, there's such a thing called the Tytler cycle. And loosely, kind of boiled down, this is the thing that you've seen over and over again, which is, hard times make tough men make good times make weak men, and weak men make hard times. We're in the last part of that,
Yeah.
very clearly. Our culture is weaker than it's ever been. And we are losing, we're in a massive cultural decline at this point. And it's an engineered cultural decline that has largely come out of the universities, has also come out of pop culture, and now is coming out of corporate America. And I'm sure we're going to talk about the whole Bud Light disaster, which is part and parcel of this. But what sort of underlies that, tough men, hard times thing is that you always have, so you're always going to have adversity in your life. If you don't have real adversity, you will manufacture adversity, right? And so, for example, you had back in 100 years ago, you had this like generation of American writers, and they called them the lost generation. And some of them, were people who had fought in World War I, and they were kind of, emotionally damaged by that. But really, you had lots of people that didn't, who were still in that same sort of situation. And, really some of the whiniest writers you'll ever see. And it was, complaining about the prosperity of the Roaring 20s. At that point, America was, and we ended up ascending beyond that. But in the 20s, America was the unquestioned, at the pinnacle of, cultural, economic, military, and all these different things in the 20s. We were ascendant coming out of World War I. That was the first sort of decade of American dominance on the world stage. And the way we responded to it in large measure was, with decadence, and with entitlement. The 20s were racked by like World War I veterans doing bonus marches in DC. And there were these big, like protests that you would recognize now. And it was, guys that fought in World War I for, 6 months, some of whom certainly saw action. I'm not, minimizing that, but, a lot of people were in the rear with the gear, and they're like, I want my money too. And it's like, okay. So like you had that then, and it was because you had a country that was booming, and like new inventions were getting brought to the market. Like life in America from 1910 and 1928 changed completely. Where you were outside washing clothes in a wash bin with a washboard, all of a sudden, like you had the first washing machines that started coming into the market, and you had radios, and you had all these different things that began to penetrate the market and make lives so much easier, whereas we can look at people living in America in 1910 and not really recognize the lifestyle they were living. But by 1928, we would, okay? So like the prosperity and success of the country was such that if you were industrious, if you were smart, if you had ideas and were willing to work for them, you could make fabulous amounts of money, for the time in the 20s. But if you didn't have those things, you were getting left behind. And there was, while the country was prospering, you had a growing socialist movement in America for, the people who saw themselves as the have-nots. Mm-hmm. Point is, America in the 20s had very little adversity. And yet the politics of that time were not placid. Okay. They were pretty kind of, riotous and chaotic. And it was because, if you have prosperity, but it's not shared, then people get left out, which is manufacturing adversity where there isn't any. And I think we've had a lot of that over the last 30 or 40 years in this country. And, I blame the right for a lot of this because we've been poor stewards, particularly in red states, of the culture, the economics, and the politics. And I talk about this all the time. State legislatures in red states funded the living hell out of higher education and paid no attention to the left-wing morons that were running those institutions. And now those institutions, even in public schools in red states, are off the rails with woke ideology, and the generation of kids that they're turning out are do not process information in ways that Americans have processed information, right? It's all emotion. They're told that they're special. And so if things don't work out in their life, then something is wrong. When, life is adversity. Life is an obstacle course, right? And if you're not prepared by the time you're 18 for that fact, then you're going to have a rough early adulthood. Because, the minute you leave mom and dad's house, or even before you leave mom and dad's house, you're going to find out that not everybody on the planet thinks you're as special as your folks do. And that, that used to be a major rite of passage for, everybody is like, you're going to leave, even if you're the smartest, most freaking well-adjusted kid, you're going to leave home and some bad things are going to happen that you're going to have to learn from because you couldn't learn about that in school. And for some reason, we have, as a society, done a really bad job of preparing kids for that. And we have indulged all of these childish things that people who are no longer children are still holding on to. We're letting the boys play video games in the basement for way too long. Yep. We're letting the girls go clubbing and screw a million guys and make themselves completely unattractive to worthwhile men, right? Yep. And so, in other words, we're allowing our culture to destroy an entire generation of Americans. And this is the harvest you get from that. You get Nashville. I think the banker was in Louisville. I don't think it was Tennessee, it was in Kentucky, right? Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. But anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is these are 20-somethings, okay, right, who their parents have done everything they could to give them the best life they could. And they're totally unprepared for real life as a result of that. These kids needed to get in schoolyard fights. They needed not to have to go talk to the teacher if they got bullied in school. They needed to have to deal with the bully themselves, right? All of the things that Generation X and earlier knew instinctively. If there was a bully in the neighborhood, then you got a couple friends together and y'all ganged up on the bully, and that was how you make the bully go away. You don't go call.
The thing is, I was bullied a couple times in school. I'm thinking about it. I'm not sure that I ever even told my parents. This is that literally happened. I was in, this will make you laugh because this is something that would never happen now. But we were in a swim class in sixth grade, seventh grade, and we had a natatorium, which was unusual. We were in a town, we were in a wealthy car town. It was Lansing, Michigan, and so like the tax money was ridiculous because we had a couple plants. And so that made the local schools, you know, like crazy. We had a natatorium in middle school. This was 6th and 7th grade, and we had a planetarium, no joke, in the high school.
Nice.
Right. I mean, it was crazy.
I can imagine the high school kids would be bringing joints to the planetarium and freaking smoking up all the time.
Not with the astro person who was there. She was mean. But anyway, okay. So some PhD ladies teaching in high school.
Star Nazi.
Yeah, star.
Got it. Okay.
Right. But anyway, in middle school, this kid who didn't swim very well, but didn't particularly like me for reasons I still don't quite understand. But, you know, one of those weird things that happens in school. I had to go to the bottom of the pool and hold on to the grate because he was trying to drown me. I was a really strong swimmer, and so I was okay. But the thing is like, I'm trying to think, my kids have never been in that kind of a situation where you might actually get drowned. A girl pulled a knife on me in the bathroom one time, and this was in a suburb. This wasn't even a bad area. The level of routine violence that was just a part of life is almost unfathomable now. But on the other hand, those low levels of violence, which were pretty high levels when you think back about it, but you were scrapping, and man, I played sports, and so that too, you know, you were getting, and it was not nice. There were no nice rules. People were winning and losing. It was vicious. I read an article today, or not an article, a thing on Twitter about how they're recruiting for college sports, and the problem that they're having right now is a basketball coach was saying, no one cares if they lose now. Like, I hated, like we talked about this last time, like hating to lose and wanting to win so bad. This recruiter was saying that the problem is that the kids don't really care. And so it's so difficult to coach them because they're like, they don't care if they lost. And there's just this kind of, I think it's our fault. I think it's our generation and the boomers' fault for making everything so easy for this generation. And I'm just not sure. I'll say this. Some parents are doing well. So like I have a friend of my daughter's parents are just phenomenally wealthy, like obscene. And their daughter, they said, we'll pay for your college, but we're not paying for your grad school. You're going to have to figure that out. And my daughter's like, I don't understand. That doesn't make sense. They could pay for it. And I was like, yeah, but it's hers. She will have to fight for it. She's going to have to live poor getting through her grad school. She's going to have to pay it off. It's her thing. You don't build self-esteem if you don't have a self to esteem. And you have to, you only get a self by working for it, you know? And so like, I think that they made a really good decision, but a lot of parents are not making that decision and not fighting for their child's soul and putting their kids in a position to have one when they're all finished with education. You were mentioning the educational system when we were talking off camera, and I think that's a big part of it. But I really put a lot of this at the doorstep of the parents who are something is missing. Either they're not, something is, you know. But then again, these two families seem to be fine families, you know? I mean, you never know what's going on.
Yeah, you don't know what's going on inside. I mean, my guess is both of these kids were horrendously coddled, you know? I don't get the impression either of them were, you know, well-liked in school. You know, they were kind of the loser kids.
Well,
which is not to say they didn't do well in school or whatever, but
he was like,
you know, it was one of those things.
Basketball team. And so was the other girl. The girl, she was in sports and,
Well,
she
I
was
know, but
quiet, but
just because they played sports doesn't mean that they weren't weird
yeah.
or whatever. I mean, like what you notice about a lot of these kids is just because they do all the things,
Hmm.
it doesn't make them well adjusted like people in our generation were, like if you made the basketball team, then there was a certain amount, like even if you were a, kind of a dorky kid, you kind of got brought out of your shell because you were on the team and all of a sudden you had a set that you were hanging with and
Hmm.
like disparate personalities would come together, and largely because the coach would make the team suffer.
Yeah.
And shared suffering is the best way to
Hmm.
bond people. I mean, like people don't get it. Like you had this entire thing, and I mean, I'm sure I'm going to probably make myself fringe for saying this, but like we had for years and years and years now, and it's pretty much like almost completely settled thing. Oh, we can't have hazing in fraternities and sororities and colleges. Well, like I don't want to freaking force a bottle of Everclear down some 18-year-old kid's throat, obviously. But the
Right.
run of the mill hazing stuff never should have been banned. Like, never should have been banned. Like, you're a pledge for some fraternity and the actives make you come clean their apartment. You're 18. You probably never cleaned anybody's house before. You probably ought to know how. So it's not that it's a bad thing. And then the second thing is it teaches you the value of seniority. You put in your dues and then you can have somebody clean your apartment, right? Also, the thing is you get to know how the asshole actives treat you, and you decide, well, I'm not going to be that way to the pledges, so I'm not going to be that guy, right?
Right.
I mean, like you learn a lot about human behavior through, those kinds of experiences, and the fact that you had two of your pledge brothers and you're cleaning some guy's apartment and the dishes haven't been touched in 4 weeks and it's gross. Like that's a story you're going to tell when you're 55,
Hmm.
right? These kids don't have any stories. These kids have a phone.
Hmm.
And it's like, in other words, it's a way of living that nobody pre-tested before they inflicted it on an entire generation of people. And it doesn't turn out to be very good for anybody's character or their soul or their personality. I mean, some are fine, but like I'll talk to an 18-year-old kid and they can't look me in the eye.
Hmm.
Hey, I'm right here. And they can't even look you in the eye. And it's like, has nobody ever made eye contact with you? Like, what's going on with
Maybe
you?
not. Well, the thing is, so like I
I
was
mean,
watching.
none of them know how to give a handshake. And it's like, this is basic shit. Come on, man.
Yeah.
And it's a culture that has dramatically changed. It's not an organic change. I mean, like whatever they're teaching in education schools, they need to stop because it's all bad. And so you have teachers, I mean, the church is not doing a good job of counteracting any of that.
Well, that's
Pop
because
culture is
parents
a
aren't bringing their
disaster.
kids to church. The thing is,
Well,
the kids aren't
and the
going.
ones that are don't freaking learn anything. That's the problem.
Right.
I mean, like it used to be that you would, well, look, there's a hierarchy, right? Like there's different ways of getting people to like learn things and adopt behaviors. And at the bottom of that hierarchy is you have to inflict pain so that they really associate doing the right thing with pain avoidance. And that, like, for most people, or not most people, for the bottom rung of folks on society, that's how you got to teach them. Okay. The really top ones, you can just explain it. Hey, we're doing this because of this, and we'd really like you to do X. And they go, yeah, okay, I'll do X. X is not a big problem for me, right? So yeah, here's a successful behavior I'll adopt because somebody introduces me to it. The top 10%, you get that. After that, it's various stages of like, you have to be meaner and meaner to get them to do the right thing. All the way down to some people you treat like you treat your dog. Hey, if you pee on the floor, I'm going to whack you across the nose with a newspaper, right? It's not that I want to do it. It's that I know that this will stop you from peeing on the floor, right? And you peeing on the floor is a deal breaker for me. So, you get the newspaper across the nose. Well, guess what? People, especially kids, are not that different. I mean, they really aren't. Hopefully you can be a little more intellectual with them, but at base, you better have that newspaper. And nobody uses it anymore.
Wait a minute. So, okay, having raised a couple kids, I can tell you that one of the problems that I see are parents trying to reason with 2-year-olds. And this is the thing.
The dog is better than that, right?
Well, a 2-year-old doesn't have a reasoning capability. They can understand certain things receptively, but the wiring is simpler, and you have these parents trying to convey very complex, have these, and all it does is it makes a parent look like an ass, when what you should be doing is barking at your kid like a drill sergeant.
Stop that.
And then rewarding them when they do the right thing, and using positive whatever. One of the things that I was watching last night with my son was a video of Business Insider has these videos, just for parents out there listening, of new recruits and what they go through. And the Business Insider reporter was talking about like how some of this was really cruel. And I wanted to smack him because he's like, this practice hasn't changed. Because one of the things that they do is they put
why does the practice have to change?
Pepper spray into, like, boom, straight in the face of recruits for the Border Patrol guys. So, and then they make them, with that in their face, tackle someone and subdue a suspect, blinded and basically in eyes blinded, and they can't breathe. But they still have
can absolutely happen in the field, right?
Exactly. And I was like, this should not change. I'm sorry, this is painful and terrible and whatever. But their only way for soldiers or Department of Public Safety or Border Patrol or whoever is going to be able to deal with this kind of real world situation is to be desensitized to the stress of it.
Right.
Practicing the American, it's
called training.
Because they do have this training. And so I'm like, but I had to say this. I feel bad saying it. But our recruits that were on video were so sad looking. It was like a whole group of Captain Americas before he got injected with the juice. I was like, this is the saddest group of groups, because it was different military branches that they're looking at. We're in deep trouble. Yeah. These kids they didn't look like they had been properly nourished. Like, I was like, what is
crappy muscle tone and
crappy muscle tone. They're even if they weren't fat, they were kind of pathetic. And I was like, how are they going to survive in a difficult situation? We better hope.
I bet you noticed
robots now. I bet
you noticed that all of these kids had crappy posture too, right?
Yeah, well, they were having.
I see that a ton, like 18 to 20. It was like, could you stand up straight? You remember when Jordan Peterson wrote that whole thing about the lobsters and the serotonin and stand up straight and it's a bigger deal. And this was, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, I guess now. It's been a while. Like they gave him all kinds of crap about that.
Right.
Like, why are you telling people that they have to stand up straight and what's up with the lobsters and all? And it's like, dude, he just explained to you why this is valuable. And he explained why this is a 5,000-year-old civilizational deal, particularly among men, that they're told, hey, stand up straight. They might not have known anything about serotonin when they came up with that. But the whole point is that somebody knew, based on experience, that guys who stand up straight act in a more dominant, professional, competent manner than guys that slouch over and freaking look like somebody's, servant. And so now we have a whole generation, like Jordan Peterson has to tell them to stand up straight because nobody else will. And they act like it's a violation of their civil rights when they're told that.
Right.
And it's like, okay, yeah, you're right. We are in a lot of trouble because like all of the things that we brought all of this stuff with us from Europe when our people moved over. That, it was thousands of years of civilizational experience that got distilled into like all the best parts when people were free of the bad crap in Europe and were able to build a brand new society in America. And we were at the top, which is why we spent 200 years building a wilderness into the greatest country the world had ever seen. And now we're busily forgetting all of the lessons. And I'm not talking about the politics and the Declaration of Independence and all that. I'm talking about the basic stuff. Stand up straight.
Right.
Obey, like obey your parents,
Yeah, but the thing
don't
is,
whine when things get bad, like those kinds of things. And we're losing all of that. And I don't understand how, other than it can't possibly be organic.
I have some theories. One is women are not at home taking care of their kids anymore.
That's part
Over
of it.
60% of children don't have a parent at home. Well, they have two parents working. Right. It requires a lot of attention to be watching your kid and cooking for your kid, making sure your kid is healthy, not putting them in daycare. We are forgetting that children are being institutionalized and unsocialized from infancy all the way through. They never know anything but those four walls. And right. Home is somewhere they come home exhaustedly to sleep and then start the cycle again. And they don't have any of that meaningful interaction. Then you have all the divorce that's happening. So children are being raised with one parent, not with both. Right. And so like, I will say, if anything, that kind of, and then the third thing is the parents themselves are distracted. So like,
absolutely,
if a child has a choice between their parent and a device, they'll choose the parent. But if there's enough indifference for long enough, the child will have learned from their parents being on a device that the device is going to give them more attention to their parent. And so I'm not surprised that all of these kids are like on TikTok, or they think that their best friends in the world are some pedophile across the internet in another state. Because if they had even a fraction of that kind of attention from their parents, then they would feel like they had a friend or somebody who cared about them, locally. The other thing that's interesting is that with the technology changes, call someone up. Hello, Mrs. So-so, is, Melissa there? Is Scott there? Well, you had to develop social skills because the mom would say, boy, your friend has no manners, if they didn't, deal with the phone correctly or whatever. And so you're learning in there about how to interact. And then you had to get together physically, see people, see their reaction to the conversation you had. And your friends, I was talking to a friend about this, and we're like, both of us had relatively, let's see, unhappy childhoods. Okay. I had, and we were talking about, we didn't realize that it was the best of times. We would leave the house at the beginning of the day and then come back and whatever. And we were on our own and didn't think anything really much of it. But the freedom that we had to make mistakes and to figure things out on our own, we didn't have maps. So we got lost.
Yeah.
Out in the country sometimes, or, in crazy things. I remember being with all my friends in high school when we ran out of gas when one of my friends had a boat. We had to figure it out. You know what I mean? Like there was just, I think about it now, we would be horrified as parents of our kids being in that situation, but all of those things. And I don't know that we really talked to our parents about all that, by the way. I don't think we did. Like, it was just like a different world. And so all those things combined between the technology, between nobody interacting with the children at home, children being kind of viewed as appendages, cultural wide, like, people are so contemptuous of parents. Why are you bringing kids on a plane anyway? As though your life should stop once you have children. And
well, the other thing is because the kids got to learn how to freaking be on a plane.
yeah, but the thing is, when my experience has been, Scott, that the kids haven't been the problem. It's all the rotten adults. Very rarely have I seen, maybe twice in all of my years, one time because this poor child had an earache and it was like 8, 9 months old and his ear was literally exploding on the plane. I felt bad for that kid and the parents. But generally speaking, one kicker here or there. Generally speaking, I've seen more adults act ridiculous than kids. There is a contempt for families, and then there's a few families who make everybody else look bad because they have rotten kids and don't know how to deal with them. So all of these things together, and then nobody's taking their kids to church. No one's setting, like, there's no moral rules anymore. It's kind of like what you want to do.
Right.
You add it all up and you have
the
this
moral rules are
mess.
oppressive. They're oppressive is the thing.
Well, yes.
That's the message is, although you can't do that because you're going to oppress these people if you tell them what's what. And it's like, well, okay, but there are behaviors that lead to success and there are behaviors that lead to failure. And the moral rules are a way to draw a line between those and keep people on the right side of it so they have healthier lives. Which is, at base, like this whole trans thing, that's kind of what it is. Like, these are behaviors that are going to be super, lead to failure in life. Okay. Which 40% of them attempt suicide after they get what they want.
Right.
And it was a friend of mine that I was eating lunch with not too long ago was talking to me. He read a thing or saw something on TV or something. And it was like, this guy who had done the whole transgender freaking surgery thing. And it's a year later and they're checking in on him and like, okay, well, how's this work? And he says, I went through all of this and I had this all done and I haven't been kissed in a year. And it's like, so nobody told you that this was that bad an idea. Like, you did this to try to get love, but like, what did you do to make yourself?
I know who you're talking about. So this Dylan Mulvaney, the kid who is the spokes thing for Anheuser-Busch.
Bud Light and now Nike as well.
Yep.
And Tampax tampons, which I just don't get. And I don't think we should talk about that.
And also KitchenAid. But anyway, so this kid, he goes through all of this and he says he can't get a date. I haven't had a date for a year. Well,
okay.
It's the thing is that, like, first off, the real percentage of, did you see the chart that was out today? Like 19.7% of Gen Zers consider themselves LGBTQ alphabet people.
Right.
And I was like, yeah, born this way. Mm-hmm. This is not a cultural contagion or anything. And you look at this,
not at all.
Not at all. You look at the stats for, Gen X, boomers and whatever, and it's pretty level. The thing with all this, though, is that they're isolating themselves further. The Venn diagram of people who are interested in you, if you're a kind of physical mutant, is tiny.
Yeah.
And so, like, while you might have an outsized audience on Twitter for your craziness,
it ain't real life.
No, and it's more like looking at someone in a zoo. And the thing is, it's exploitive, and people don't. And the fact that
was one of the most abusive things that I have ever seen, is to take a 6-year-old kid and try and change their gender.
Yep.
So that you could go do the whole thing to get attention on the internet. Literally, it's one of the worst things I've ever seen done.
Well, and so publicly, and like, I'm like, we are all watching the destruction of a child.
Yeah. And what was the quote that the kids said is, I just once would like to feel like me, and I haven't felt like me in a long time. And I'm like, I mean, that feel like it, that just,
Yeah.
it hurts your heart to see like, oh my God, they've done this to you.
Yeah.
Right. And how does the entire country not just, okay, now it's time to wise up? But we're like, there's so many of these stories now that we just, like we're almost desensitized to this kind of needless suffering.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
First of all, most of these people who consider themselves trans have been led this way by something, whether it's a pop
Mhm.
culture thing, whether it's the schools, whether it's wacko leftist parents or something has influenced them to go this direction.
Right.
But the other thing, and I mean, obviously the internet is playing a huge, huge, huge role in this. But the other thing, and I want to pick up on something that you were talking about a little bit earlier, was one of the things that, because of parental indifference and because of not having two parent families and both parents working when there are, one of the things that you don't get with kids, but I notice you do get a ton of with homeschooled kids, is that like they get virtually no positive interactions of a casual nature with adults, and they get very few opportunities. Like, there's the woman who runs the daycare thing who's a pro, and God knows what kind of crazy stuff she believes in. And then there's the teachers, 90 something percent of them are going to be female, which is not bad or not good for the boys to have like no father figure around or any of that. But like, they don't see adults. They don't like interact with adults in sort of just an ordinary manner. And so you have all of these kids who are they're in a daycare setting, or they're in a classroom setting, and when it's not that, it's the device, or so they interact with other people that are pretty much all their age.
Mhm.
They don't even know how to interact with their parents. Adults who are not their parents, they basically have almost no interaction with them at all. Whereas 30, 40, 50 years ago, you went and got yourself a job cutting Mr. Jones's lawn, right? And he'd pay you $20. And that was a thing, because that was your, money to go buy baseball cards or something.
Right.
And everybody was like, yeah, this is what you're supposed to do, right? Like, you take Dad's lawnmower and you go cut Mr. Jones's lawn. And oh, by the way, you got to put gas back in the lawnmower for Dad, because that was his investment in this deal. And then you get to keep whatever the overage was. And so it was like, hey, this is pretty good. And you learned all kinds of things. Most of all, you learned how to deal with adults in a manner that didn't make you a burden on them, right?
Mhm.
And pretty soon, Mr. Jones would actually tell you something about life that might be worth hearing about.
Right.
And almost all of that, from what I can see, is lost. Okay. You may get interactions if you're playing sports as a kid with a coach. And most of those kids, not all, we've seen in the case of these two wackos that went off on people the last couple of weeks, are different. But most kids who are doing the sports thing, whether it's they're playing travel ball for softball or baseball or whatever, or they're doing like these different things, and they interact with a coach and the other parents on the team and whatever, and you do have sort of those kind of healthy adult interactions, and they become a lot more well adjusted, and they understand, okay, well, these are the people that I've met who are older than me, and this is what they've done with their lives, and they've kind of normal stuff. Like, you get it, right? Like, you start to see, okay, this is how all of this works. And my job is to sort of figure out how I fit into it. Right. And that's how you pick a career path, or that's how you sort of see yourself progressing as a big picture thing. I don't think this generation gets that at all. Like, I think that they are, they're in games, and they're watching TV shows, and they're looking at stupid things on the internet, and they're like doing weird stuff with their kid friends, and mom and dad are like busy with other stuff, and if they're not, then they're helicopter parents, and these kids like don't really look at adults as normal people. Like, they see adults as like the people that obsess about them and are like terrified that they're going to do something wrong, right? And so it's like, you know, you and me as kids would look at this that's going on now, and they would see it as like this weird dystopian, like destructive kind of thing. You know, like, no, I'm going to get on my bike and go to the park because I got friends that are there. Well, what adults are going to be there? It's like, we don't need adults. Oh, yes, you do. How are those other parents going to let their kids go to the park? You know,
Well,
some child predator is going to come in and be like, what? What are you talking about? You
well,
know?
the thing is, I do think that part of this is a reaction from our generation, because we were so unattended. We were in situations that were sometimes I look back on it and I think
Oh,
very
yeah, for
dangerous.
sure.
And so then there's this more protectiveness, but there's also more social pressure. So say, for example, I let my kids ride to the park and there's a flasher there, which there has been, not in years, but there was one when my kids were around that age. And parents used to be like, well, that stuff happens, go to the park. Now it would be other parents were like, you let your kids go to the park and you weren't
Right.
there.
Right. Yeah. And
so
you're a bad parent for freaking parenting your kids the way kids have always been parented.
Well, and so here's another thing. So like they have these after school um places that kids can go where there's like video games and after they get their homework done, but because their parents are both working or whatever.
Right. Right.
And I remember some patients of mine back in the day when I was still seeing patients. And the kids got to the point where they preferred going there to being at home with their parents. I kid you not. And I'm like, that's sad, because after school, you should be outside running around and doing stuff. And they were like, no, we'd like to go play on the computers at our aftercare class, school. So like a bus comes
That's
to
awful.
Yep. So a bus comes to pick up the kids from the elementary school or the middle school after school's done. And from
Right.
there, you go to another institution until your parents pick you up at 6.
Right.
And then they go home, pick up some fast food on the way home. And the parents are happy because the homework's already done. They don't have to worry about it. And the kids go to bed. And then the parents go to bed exhausted. So, that's not everybody, but I would say that the greatest privilege that kids have now is if they have parents who take them to church, and then the kids go to like Bible class or whatever, and they're getting more adult interaction. And then maybe that's where they go to summer camp and they build, and then, they go to summer camp a couple years, then they become a counselor themselves. So it's strange that the more traditional families are having, and here's the thing that makes me angry. Amongst the lefty libs, they're living the highfalutin ones are living this way too.
Yeah.
They are absolutely bigoted. They think that the little people couldn't do this. And so they kind of like, we have to accept all ways of life instead of going, this is a better way of life.
Yeah.
That if you take your kids to church, send them to camp, then they have these moral values. Maybe the kids have a spiritual experience. They have a foundation to help them explain why life is hard, because it's going to be. And then they go on from there and, have a parent at home. Like the greatest luxury for a kid now is married parents and mom at home taking care of the kids going to church, and then having a good life and having attention from them, and then,
which is generally speaking not a material thing. You
No.
can be lower middle class and
you can be poor.
Yeah.
Like my mom said, us growing up, we were definitely middle class, but you can be poor and have one nice outfit. and
Right.
take pride in that. But there's this kind of weird
Well, how
mentality.
many like super successful people will tell you, look, when I was growing up, we were poor, but we didn't know it as kids,
Right,
right?
right,
Like you hear that and you almost like, yeah, whatever. But the point is, it's like, yeah, but you didn't have a poverty of values,
right,
right? And you have a society that allows for social mobility. And so people who do the right things, learn the good habits, engage in behaviors that are success oriented,
right,
right? Don't need to come from a good, socioeconomic background, so long as they have an intact family and, and learn all the right things and do the right habits. And all of a sudden, what you find is, yeah, you might have grown up freaking broke, but you probably faced a little bit more adversity than some of these snot-nosed kids that had all the advantages, and you kicked their ass.
right,
Like that, this country is full of those stories.
right.
Here's the thing, and I don't mean to like cut you off if you had more
No, that's
along
good.
the slang radio. Here's the thing. So you look at all this, and you like, for example, you talk about people who are like the lefties that live, those by those positive behavioral patterns, right? And
Mhm.
all of this stuff, and it's like, okay, so you don't think that poor people can live the way you live? Like it
Right.
won't work. They're not, whatever. And you say, yeah, it's bigoted. There's another thing at work, which is that sometime in the 60s or 70s, people on the left started to realize that it works better when you're trying to get power, whether it's over a city or whatever, if you do let the poor go to hell.
Mm.
And you do encourage these bad behaviors that will retard social mobility, right? I mean, I talk about the weaponized governmental failure piece, but
Right.
like everything that they push is license and freedom for people to act badly, pandering to criminals, pushing these kind of exotic sexual lifestyles, and the entire critical race theory piece is nothing but that. That's an excuse for failure if you're a person of color, right? And like,
Okay, can I ask you something then? Because San Francisco, for example, Whole Foods, Target, all of these different places are moving out.
yeah,
Yeah. And like Whole Foods had a flagship store in San Francisco. They have closed it down. They're
yep.
shuttering up.
All the Walgreens have closed in San
Yeah.
Francisco. It's the same thing. Yeah.
And so like this weaponized governmental failure that you're talking about that San Francisco's voted for.
Yes.
And like this one guy on Twitter was saying today that they finally moved out. They love San Francisco, but two drug addicts broke into their home, held them at knife point, robbed them, and left. And the police were like, yeah, these two have a reputation. This is their thing. Like this is not
right.
Like you're not like the third or even the fifth person this has happened to. This is
like, oh, so they got you this week, right?
right. And so like they decided they moved and they broke their heart and everything. I'm like, you people voted for this. And so my question is, why are they surprised when this happens? Because there is always
because I don't think they think it's going to happen to them until it does. There's that old saw, like a conservative is a liberal who's been mugged, right? Like, I mean,
right.
Like that's the thing is, like the thing I don't get is why San Francisco doesn't have a Charles Bronson. Like I don't like my reality is that when the cops completely abandon the shit that has happened in San Francisco,
right,
is the vigilantes move in. Like I don't like, where's Batman? Like I don't understand why there aren't neighborhood militias holding freaking every street corner in San Francisco at this point. And my guess is they just haven't suffered enough, and that's coming. Because
no,
America,
that's not. It's not coming. I can say this with a surety, and I'll tell you why. I lived in Michigan, grew up there. Flint died, Detroit died, Lansing partially died because the auto industry died, but the government seat is still there. So, it's got some
Right.
paltry reason for existence. But those cities never had a vigilante.
I know.
Those cities never had, it just slowly but surely implodes. And over time, the corruption and the graft, there's a couple people who get wealthy, but it starts to become impossible for those who are wealthy to live there safely anymore, and they move out too. And so then it just becomes
it starts with the middle class being able to get out of there and go to the suburbs. I get that. Okay. But and I think part of why you don't have that is because they have so sapped the concept of agency from the people without the means to move, that, like it doesn't occur to, poor people who live in, the Ninth Ward of New Orleans, or, some of these really bad areas in Houston, or, South Atlanta, or, like pick the, slum of your choice. Mm-hmm. Like, people don't really, like, the criminals have agency. All right. But regular folks that are just kind of in the system, the agency is that you get a job good enough that you can move out. Like that's what you can do. You can get out of there. But for the folks that are still there,
if you're in a no-go zone, for example, in Detroit, where the bad guys run roughshod over everything, you're not going to get crossways with them and narc on them, because you have to live with them the next day, because you know full well that they're getting out of prison tomorrow. So there's no witnesses to any crime. No one says anything.
That's correct.
The people continue to be victims, and the local government knows that, and and they also know that they're not going to trust any white people. So the people who are in governance there are virtually guaranteed to get reelected, because, a bad person of my race is better than a maybe good person, because we're not sure about that. But our experience has been a bad person, a bad white person. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, like, if you're going to have to choose bad and worse, might as well pick someone from my ethnic background and go down with the ship and be proud that we have a black mayor,
Well, but the people that don't believe that, okay, I mean, they may lose a few elections here and there, but then they get out.
Oh, right. No.
Get out. I mean, you find a cheap apartment in the suburbs and you go. Right. Like that's how that. I mean, because every one of these cities that's that's a dead city that fits this thing. I mean, all of them have lost massive amounts of population over the last 50 years.
Right.
I mean, whether it's Detroit, which is, went from 1.8 million to 650,000, from New Orleans, it went from 600,000 in the city proper to like 350 now, to Minneapolis.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, I lost a lot during Katrina, but it kind of came back a little and then it's fallen off again. Minneapolis, which is, was like, I think it's gone from like 700,000 to 425. I mean, like, they've all lost population, and it's because the middle class moves out. And when they go, you get this awful, sort of poverty of behavior and values. And, you lose the sense of community because, these are horrible places that have, like, but like, okay, you mentioned, for example, the lack of vigilantes. New York didn't have that problem. Like, New York had the guardian angels, right? Curtis Lewa and those guys. I mean, that actually was at various times over the history of New York, the guardian angels have been big. I mean, I think at one point in the 80s, they had 10, 20,000 guardian angels in New York. And I mean, everybody could, they're terrible. They're a bunch of fascists who are like, they report things to the police and they ask them to follow up on cases. It's like, as fascists go, they're really pretty friendly.
Well, also
and
New
Sliwa
York
ended up running
has
for mayor of
had
New
the
York.
mob, which
What's that?
kept their thumb on certain neighborhoods. And
Well, okay.
here's the surprising thing. So then this is what happened. So like in Los Angeles, when I lived out there, you had the a certain Mexican gang moved in, cleaned up the neighborhood, and there was no crime.
Right.
Guess what? Because the only
Yeah.
gig in town was the big drug dealer kingpin, and nobody messed with them.
Mhm.
And so there was some, while authority was being
a lot of the
established.
gang members were like roofers and mechanics and during the day. So it's like working class gang members, right? It was like,
right. Well, the thing
they
is,
got more work ethic than the other guys did, right?
yeah, I mean, so like so then you have a different kind of corruption, right? You have different kind of problems. I was surprised this last census here in Houston that 150,000 Hispanic people moved out of the city to the suburbs. So these fine, upstanding people with hardworking jobs were like, enough of this baloney, and they moved out.
Yep. I mean, that's, it's the progression. And actually, it's a good thing, right? Because that's positive social mobility.
Yeah.
And there's ultimately sort of a hopeful ending to this, which is, and I think you're not really seeing it in Detroit yet, but I think you probably will, which is when they've so destroyed a place that like they've ended up knocking down the houses and you have streets and streets and streets where there's nothing but empty lots, right? That's when somebody can buy the land cheap and redevelop it, and like that's when you can now, the governmental piece is hard, and
that's still the problem.
No, but I think the future there is Michigan may be difficult, but in some other places it may not be so difficult, which is the state legislature comes in and says, okay, all of this is like basically greenfield again. So we're going to incorporate a city right here. And if this big developer wants to drop $500 million to go build a whole bunch of houses and build like a little town within the city of Detroit or something, then we're gonna go ahead and charter that. And the city of Detroit's not going to run that.
Is Governor Gretchen Whitmer.
Oh, of course,
the Democrats there. So
I get it. I get all of that, but what I'm saying is, and that's why Michigan, it may not necessarily be the best test case for this.
Right.
St. Louis. Okay. St. Louis is in Missouri, which is generally speaking a red state, but St. Louis is a dead blue city. All right. Mm-hmm. And so within the next however much time, you're going to have neighborhoods in St. Louis which are completely blighted, that everybody has moved out. And it's, like the place has completely gone to seed. And, here comes some developer. Hey, this at one point, this was really good real estate. I'm going to, let me plunk down some money and I'm going to buy this from the bank or, wherever the property is held. I'm going to buy it for some, I'm going to redevelop it and put up some nice houses and, condos and, a little T&D thing. We're going to have shops and whatever, but I don't want the city of St. Louis and the wackos that run that. Like, I don't want to be governed by them. And he goes to the legislature and he says, what can you do for me? And like, we'll pass a bill chartering a city. And you like, it's your city, right? And then, so, like you're going to have these little sort of things popping up around it. Like that's what's coming, because that's how somebody's going to be able to make a lot of money off of it.
Well, I salute your optimism.
I'm not saying this turns these cities around. What I'm saying is that you're like this, you're planting seeds. Okay. Right. And I mean, this is going to happen because, the history of mankind is that, a place that is worth having at some point will be a nice place. Now, it may not stay that way, but it will return to being a nice place. I mean, you can look at geography all over the world, and this is true. And it'll happen here. I mean, you have to take a long view. It may not be in our lifetime that we see a lot of this stuff happening.
Yeah.
But part of the problem is, and I come back to this all the time, the people who are destroying all these places get to do it because there's no consequences, right? They get to do
and there's no resistance to it. Like we have Biden as president. We just had this election in Wisconsin, right? And this was a very important election in Wisconsin. It's going to have to do with voter integrity. It's going to have to do with abortion. Babies are going to die.
Yeah.
And the Republicans didn't come out to vote. The independents certainly didn't. And by default, the Democrats win.
Yep.
We're talking about the independents, and we have a president right now who is, the banks are in a precarious state. We have a proxy war in Ukraine, and in Taiwan now, China is surrounding Taiwan. Hasn't made the news, by the way.
Right.
Kind of like all, the revolution happening in France hasn't made the news. Kind of like the poisoning of girls in Iran hasn't made the news, because that would kind of throw a stinker into Biden's policy aims.
Right. It would make people understand that the world is going to hell on his watch, and they certainly can't have that.
Right. I mean, there's people who are still saying that the world respects us now because Trump isn't president.
Right.
That's just insanity.
As we lose the world's reserve currency status, right? Like, I mean, these things are all happening, but but they respect us because they really didn't like Trump. And it's like, okay, seems like things were going a little better then.
But the thing is, this kind of backwardness, because of this kind of weird, again, infectious hate, tribal kind of hatred, mob thinking. People are not really thinking. They're like voting with their id. It's just all this. It's like me vote now, me hate Trump, or whatever the thing is. Right. And it's
they care about mean tweets rather than performance,
And so I think you deserve what you get then. But I think what we're going to get is an economic collapse and a world war. That's the side part that's a little discouraging.
I hate to say it, but we're like long overdue for that, historically speaking. You go 75 years or so and you're due for everything coming apart. And the hope is that you can get through whatever kind of generational changes are always going to come, without this massive kind of cataclysm that comes in and washes everything away. But we're not poised to avoid those kinds of things. I mean, we're rushing headlong into it. I mean, how many opportunities have we had to make peace in Ukraine? And now it's like China's going to be the one that brokers it, which is going to give China an entree into Eastern Europe and Europe as a whole. And they're going to supplant us as the, outside power with all the influence. And honestly, we probably deserve to have that happen to us. And to some extent, the Europeans deserve to have it happen to them. Right.
I mean, I think they really do deserve it.
No, they totally do. The example I would use is Italy. Right. So, Italy went and joined the Belt and Road Initiative, which is China's sort of empire building economic colonial strategy. Mm-hmm. And so, they do this trade deal with the Chinese. And so the Chinese come and they buy up all of the leather goods and clothing manufacturers in Italy. Yep. And along come all of the Chinese workers who are going to now populate these companies.
Right.
And, the big in sort of industrial center of that industry in Italy is Milan. Right. So basically the city of Wuhan is linked up with the city of Milan. And there's something like 100,000 Chinese who are in Milan, and they're all working in, they're making purses and they're making dresses and shoes and all these other different things with Italian labels on them. Right. So like when you go to TJ Maxx, you're like, ooh, this is Italian. It's like kind of. Right. But anyway, so what happens? Well, the lab in Wuhan cooks up a virus that gets out and they leave the airport open. There's 3 flights a day from Wuhan to Milan. And so all these people get on a plane and they bring COVID to Milan. And Italy becomes the ground zero for COVID in Europe, right? And this is what the Belt and Road Initiative gives you, which is all of your people are out of work because the Chinese came to your place and they're working in all the factories, and you get COVID, right? And everybody drops dead because everybody is smoking. The Italians are like, they eat too many carbs and a lot of them are fat. And it's like the oldest population in Europe. So they drop like flies. And these people are sitting like, how did this happen to us? It's like, well, this is what it's not altogether great with America as your big partner. It really sucks when China is. And the South Africans are finding that out because they displaced all the local South Africans to run the coal mines that the Chinese want. I mean, they're doing it all over Africa. They're exploiting the living hell out of these people that throw in with them.
Right.
And they should know better, but they're sick of America. So they're going to freaking throw in with China. And we're going to find ourselves on the outs on the world stage. And maybe that's a good thing, because on the outs is where we can recover our industrial capacity and do some of these other things. And oh, by the way, while China is generally smarter than us, China's demographic problems are far worse than ours are. They're not going to be able to sustain the kind of empire that they want to build, and that'll collapse.
Will be. So the thing is that rebuilding time that you're talking about will be Americans at each other's throats, because costs of everything will increase.
Oh yeah,
because they'll have to, especially if we're relying on our own manufacturing, and we are truly decoupled from like China and all of her, all the little petty potentates that she'll end up having all over the. Right now we're moving to Vietnam and Indonesia, but what happens when China says no?
Right.
You can't manufacture things for America, and we're in charge now.
Well, you have to do it all in Latin America, which actually would be a really good thing. But the problem is that the Chinese are trying to buy up Latin America.
Well, trying to succeed.
We're losing the geopolitical game very badly because we're run by people who think that we're the bad guy.
Right.
And not totally without some justification based on.
We're the bad guy because they're the bad guy. The left is the bad guy. Yes, right.
I'm not even just saying the left. I'm saying the ruling.
Oh, no, I know.
The stupid things that they've done.
Yeah.
We're still the good guy in the world, but we're not as good as we ought to be.
Right.
And so yeah, that's an issue. But the point is, it's like, if you think we're bad, like, wait till you see what the alternatives are.
Right.
And these other countries need to find that out. But the other thing is they're turning to China because they look at us and they're like, those guys have lost their mojo.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not wrong for thinking that. I mean, we have been. Really, if you mark Ronald Reagan as the last truly successful American leader that we've had, and I think I can make that absolute case with a few exceptions, sort of momentary exceptions after that. I mean, you're looking at 40 years or 35 years of terrible performance, where we've gotten in wars we had no business getting in. We've bullied people to do things that were not smart. And then while at the same time, we've given away the store to people that we shouldn't have given anything to, China being the most notable one. I mean, how the hell could you have possibly given these people most favored nation trade status? To this day, it blows my mind that was ever done. And I know why it was done. They bought up the people that were going to make the vote. I mean, it was straight corruption is why that happened. So we had people selling our own people sold us out and have put China in a position to compete with us that they never should have had. So people look at all of that and they go, yeah, well, those guys are done.
Mm-hmm.
And culturally, we're in decline. I think economically, we're on the precipice of decline. It's back to what we started at the very beginning of this. Okay. Weak men make for tough times. And this is where we are. Now, the question is, How fast can tough times make strong men or tough men? Right? Like how fast can you make that happen? Because we need a quick turnaround on that one.
Well, if you're on hormones or you're low hormones because you're playing video games,
right,
making you a man is a big challenge because you're not a man anymore.
Yeah.
You've literally neutered yourself.
Yeah.
And if this young generation succeeds, they'll do better than Margaret Sanger ever imagined. They'll have done it to themselves. We'll have a bunch of neutered, they can't procreate. Like there's no creative force within them.
Right.
It's a living death.
Here's what I would say to that, because I don't want to leave that totally unchallenged.
Okay.
I think Generation Z is replete with exactly the folks you're talking about. But there is a minority within Generation Z which is way more entrepreneurial, is, I think, stronger in their faith. I mean, like you saw Asbury University and you saw the religious revival, and that has spread to some other campuses around the country. And like, there is a minority in Generation Z which is fighting through the adversity that the majority is not. And I think some of these kids are going to grow up to be really, really, really good leaders.
Yeah.
Now, the question is, what are the tribulations that get them there? Right? You know, are they gonna have to do like a modern day Valley Forge to get America back to where it needs to be? And that's, you know, okay, like it gets back to, okay, you know, do the tough times make the tough men? I think there are some Generation Z people that will rise to that challenge. I don't think it's a total loss.